Welcome to the fourth episode of Engine for Art, Democracy, and Justice, Paths of Emerging Solidarity. My name is Samar Ali, and I'm the president and CEO of Millions of Conversations, and it is our honor to join hands in partnership with Vanderbilt, with EADJ, with Fisk University, and the Frist Art Museum around this monumental endeavor. Particularly as at Millions of Conversations, we are focused on transcending divides by bringing people together around commonly shared values and working towards a shared future. It is for this and many other reasons combined that we believe strongly in the power of the Engine for Art, Democracy, and Justice, EADJ, to help us realize our work towards a shared future. One realized by facing the truth and embracing reconciliation in America and around the world today. EADJ is helping us deal with our past and present while simultaneously inspiring us to see one another's humanity, driving us towards a future rooted in commonly shared 21st century values. It is at this intersectionality between art, democracy, and justice that we truly believe will help us get there to work towards a better tomorrow. And with that, it is my honor to turn it over to you, Magda.
Hola, everyone. In this auspicious Wednesday, October 14, 2020, I am reaching you from the ground of Vanderbilt University, and I am sitting on land that was the land of the native people of this country, and their spirits and their energy support us. Also, the work of our ancestors who came here and built these cities and this ground. Paths of Emerging Solidarity is the topic of this seminar, and as such, it dwells with love. And as such, there is no love that is not painful. There is no love that doesn't bring a struggle, disagreement, and a lot of different ways to fall together. In thinking about Paths of Solidarity, I am going back to 1984 as a young student at the Higher Institute of Art in Havana, Cuba, and the launching of the first Havana Biennale. It was that particular event who brought together artists from areas they have never been necessarily seen in the center of contemporarity. It was an event that brought together the planetary South in a way that we had not imagined before. The war, as we saw it in the Havana Biennale in 1984, was the majority of the people that were not included in the other main exhibitions that have been celebrated in main locations in Europe. So that spirit of bringing together forgotten histories and forgotten narrative, as it was presented in the Havana Biennale, inspired the work of many, and certainly my own. It's in that spirit of working together through difficulties, of working together through limitations, and literally pushing forward in moments of despair that I launched EADJ, and is in the center core of the ideas and the energy that really fuel this engine for art, democracy, and justice. I am grateful to everyone that served us and worked with us in this endeavor. I am grateful to Samar Ali from Millions of Conversations, Susan Edward from Fried's Museum, Jamal Sheet from Fisk University, and the support of our university, Vanderbilt. I am also grateful today to Marina Fokidis, our program curator, for bringing together Salah Hassan, Nico Papasteriadis, Gavion Koval, and Alison Glenn as our panelists and contestants. I pass the microphone to Marina. I welcome you to the continuum of EADJ webinar. Thank you.
Hello, Mag. Hello, everybody. Dear Magda, thank you is not enough of a word to show my gratitude for making us part of your vision. and giving us the chance to walk together on the challenging and gratifying path that brings us today here. Dear viewers, dear panelists, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and from wherever you are, and thank you for joining us. It's a big honor for me to be part of the family of Engine of Our Democracy and Justice, which was conceived and founded by Magda Campos Pons and refers to her dreams and efforts to make this world a better place. My immense gratitude goes, of course, to all the strategic partners, to our team behind the scenes, without whom we wouldn't be here, and of course, to all participating guests, speakers, moderators of all the episodes, respondents, whose knowledge and practice have been informing us for a long time now, much beyond the time frame of the webinar, and has inspiring us largely for this program. Difficulties in breathing due to the pandemic, difficulties in breathing due to the political motivated murders that are unstoppable all over the world, difficulties in accepting the injustice towards each other, difficulties in imagining a truly democratic space open to multiple viewpoints and perspective at the same time, difficulties called for an immediate action. And here we are, addressing the living in common in the precarious Souths, living in common and not common living, as per the distinction that French philosopher Jacques-Luc Nancy makes, referring to the togetherness that allows not only polyphony, but also contradictions to coexist with inequality and respect. How can we redefine the way our differences brings us together and celebrate them, as Audre Lorde suggests? How to live together is the eternal question. This program is a space of diagnosis without claims of a heroic healing. It's time to repair our coexistence, and because otherwise it will be too late. Now, with no further ado, I would like to introduce our guest today, as I am also the moderator of this episode, some of my favorite people in this world that I never imagined before we will be all gathered in a conversation. Following our conversation, there will be the respondents, and then there will be the time for the public to address the questions. So please bear with us. The conversation will be on a rotation basis, and also please keep in mind that there are Spanish subtitles. So do I have now the panel with me? Can I have the panel with me? Hello, everybody. I will start by introducing by alphabetical order, because that's the best to do. So I'll start by introducing Salah Hassan, who is born in Khartoum. Salah Hassan is an art historian and critic and curator. I'm sorry for reading, but I have to remember all the details. He's the Godwin Smith Professor of African and African Diaspora Art History and Visual Culture, as well as the director of the Institute for Contemporary Modernities in Cornell University. He is the editor and founder of the legendary NKA Journal of Contemporary African Art, and he has authored and co-edited several books, including Darfur and the Crisis of Governance in A Critical Reader in 2009, Unpacking Europe in 2001, and many more. Also, he had curated many exhibitions, and part of these books are the accompanied catalogs. He's working closely with Sarza Art Foundation, and recently, of what I know, he's part of the working core team for the next Sarza Art Biennale, which will be curated by the late Okwi Enezor, a first sort of post-mortem endeavor, and so the designated team assisted to this. Gabi Ngobo, also with us, born and live in South Africa, is an artist and curator and educator living in Johannesburg. She has been engaged in many curatorial and educational projects in South Africa since the early 2000s. In 2018, she curated the 10th Berlin Biennial under the title We Don't Need Another Hero, and she was one of the co-curators of the Sao Paulo Biennial in 2016. She is the founding member of the Johannesburg-based Collaborative Platforms, NGO, that stands for Nothing Gets Organized, that was initiated in 2016, and the Center for Historical Reenactment that lasted from 2010 to 2014. And Nikos Papasteriadis, born in Melbourne by Greek parents. Nikos is a sociologist, a theorist, a writer, a thinker, and a director of the research unit in public cultures and a professor in Melbourne University. His long involvement with questions of home, cultural identity, spatial aesthetics, cross-contamination and fertilization of cultures, and similarly to Sala, with ideas of decolonizing knowledge, have informed largely the contemporary art and theory scenes and writings. His publications include Modernity in Exile, The Turbulence of Migration, Cosmopolitanism and Culture, and many others. I have to say an anecdote. When I first met Nikos as a person, I could never believe he has flesh and bones. As it happens to have been reading a lot of his books, I thought he would be square, white, and with some lines over. So it was a very interesting encounter. You know, this kind of thing when you keep meeting somebody through reading much of his work. And also with us, we have Alison Glenn, which will be responding to today's panel. Alison is the Associate Curator of Contemporary Art at Crystal Bridges Museum. She was a member of the curatorial team of the State of the Art that happened in 2020, which opened simultaneously at Crystal Bridges and the Momentary in early months of 2020. She was also spearheaded the adoption of Hank Wills Thomas, All Things Being Equal, at Crystal Bridges, the first comprehensive survey of the artist's works organized by Portland Art Museum. In her role, she focuses on how public sculpture can activate and engage the museum 120 acres campus with outdoor exhibitions such as Color Field and many more. We are by now to our 4th episode, and 1 month has passed already in which every Wednesday we gather here among us and with many others that we don't see, but hopefully are with us in the cloud of Zoom, and form fiery conversations on redefining monuments, on living together, on forming solidarities for a better world. Coexistence is easier said than done, but our hopes are not crushed, because if they were, there will be no chance for such a thing. Our fourth episode, like our episode, focuses on actually the paths of solidarities that are emerging or not emerging or re-emerging. And we ask, how can we plot new trajectories that weave a common psychogeography through engagement and exchange among us? How can we be seeing and understanding the world from multiple perspectives at the same time? How can we shape interchanges among neighborhoods, cities, regions, descender geographies and approaches in search of radical forms of togetherness? How we can prioritize translocality and polyvocality, which sings in a chorus in which all voices, the weaker and the louder, are clashing and also get united for one cause, justice and democracy. It's perhaps in these very narrow spaces between the heres and the theirs that have been partially separated, where inconsistencies and flaws can reconfigure and harness with sensitivity and affection. What about the formation of a number of strong collectivities that bypasses national borders and clock times as we know them now, and which responds to a set of new commons based on empathy and resonance shared between specific localities? What about a network of various sovereignties in relation based to common worries and to the notion of lack, for example? The maze maybe shouldn't be the problem, but closed doors are the problem. And so let's get more confused or not. I would like to start my questions with Salah Hassan. And I was reading Salah and I wanted to come back with this. Salah has been working for a long time with redefining the concept of modernities, with redefining the concept or reinitiating the concept of non-Western modernities, and of also seeing Africa from a kind of a more global perspective. I wanted to, my question to you is, where do we start if we want to open the possibility for a discursive and fundamental change? And also, since you've been working for so long on bringing these other modernities into the larger art historical narrative, I wanted to ask you, as we started this morning before we went into public, what has been changing in the last years after your and your colleagues' struggle for historicizing African modernity, basically from raw material? Sala.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Marina, and thank you so much, Maria, for the invitation and for all the team that is organizing it. I would like to ask us how many minutes do I have, because you've asked so many questions. So it would be good, I can imagine taking the time of the whole panel. I'm just kidding, but tell me estimately how much can I talk?
Look, you can take, I mean, I will cut you if you take a long time, but the idea is that it will be a discussion. So we will be rotating with these questions. I'm not going to repeat these questions many times.
Oh, okay. So first of all, let me just start by answering one major thing. Is that what do you really mean? Because the title itself is Emerging Solidarities. So I wanted to start by really offering at least an understanding, like based on which that I was engaged in any sort of solidarity that can translate into an academic discourse or an art historical discourse, which is, if you say emerging solidarities, I would interpret it as unfolding solidarities, because solidarity is an old concept that is based on a certain understanding of the world system that dominated since the mid-20th or 19th century by capitalism, and by another system that is intertwined with it is colonialism. Those two systems, of course, resulted in certain set of systemic inequalities that tend to dominate us even in the afterlife of colonialism, or in the afterlife, if we assume there's an afterlife of capitalism. First, it has to be based on understanding that capitalism in itself, not just only necessarily intertwined with colonialism, is from the beginning is a highly racialized system. And it produced a certain set of inequalities that can be translated in art history as a system of exclusion, otherization, primitivizing, and so forth. But then also with recent discourse, of course, that did not remain as just only some of the systems that, as people who are in coloniality studies, especially Annabel Quijano and Latin Americanists, is that it is the afterlife of colonialism and the systems of inequalities, including caste, class, race, and so forth, that we inherited, that we struggled with. So these, of course, require also an understanding and inclusion of what's happening today, the new discourses that are furthered by feminists, people who are in queer studies and so forth, and overall that produce a new system of analysis, or a system of analysis that complemented either post-colonial studies or coloniality studies by introducing some sort of intersectionality where all of these concepts intersect. But let me just say, it's also based on that feeling, with that understanding, is on a feeling that injustice is anywhere and injustice everywhere, as Martin Luther King has said. So for me, the solidarity, or the things that I have done, build ideologically on certain things that happen, that I inherited, either within the African domain, or the global South-South domain, or even the North itself, which is starting. It's interesting how today I was just looking for certain material, then I just got this email about how this month we are celebrating the 75th anniversary of the 5th Pan-African Congress that was held in Manchester in 1945, which is attended by people who played a big role in post-independent Africa, like Nkrumah, Nnamdi Ezekwe, and Jomo Kenyatta. Then, of course, there is the whole legacy of the Pan-African Congresses, like the 56 in Paris, 59 in Rome, 66 in Dakar, and then 69 in Algiers, and then 70 1997 in Festac in Nigeria, Lagos. So these are, of course, a series of events, each one added to the other, each one produced a certain set, but affected my own work and many people, Africanists, who actually entered the field, let us say in the late 80s, early 90s, that they are actually equipped with this and they wanted to build on it. So that is one of the motivations of really moving as an artist or into the field of curating, because often it was not highly regarded within the tenure system in the American universities specifically. But nowadays everybody's doing it, because simply for us, we were not dealing with that artist. Modernity or modernism was not really documented, or they're included in museums, as it is easier for people to work within the contemporary or the modern Western art. So our intervention is an act of solidarity, in a sense that to make people visible, to make them, to establish the very raw material from which art historians can take on and canonize those people and introduce them into books. And I think to some extent, we succeeded in those. I'll just mention 3 examples that we can actually talk about them later, and I don't want to dominate this, but I wanted to say the project of Africa in Venice, that's based on which we did authentic eccentric. It's about actually African conceptualism specifically. I will talk about that just briefly, but I wanted to say that project in itself, when I remember it now, it's interesting how it is almost the 20th anniversary of it. That means I've been too long in the academy and too much getting old in that sense. But Africa in Venice is an act of solidarity in which even people in the North are involved. I will never, forget many Italian, Chiara Bertola, Roberto Ulisse, several Italians who really showed us the way. We were really young, we were really entering Venice. It was not a known terrain. Their solidarity provided us with the technical aspect, with the space, with so many things. Then there is the work that's done on other levels. The Ford Foundation used to have a great African-American professor, Margaret, who used to teach at Berkeley. There was also heading the African culture. There was Damian Pono, who was a Ford officer, cultural officer dealing with the global. And those are the people who facilitated the funding. Not to forget other people like Florence Alexis from African Création in Paris, people at Innova. There were just so many institutions at the time that intervened to make our job. Prince Claus Fund, Els van der Plas. It happened, it's like almost like the star aligned that to really help us enter in that moment. And of course, not to forget the work of the artists themselves, who was very important in highlighting that event. What we tried to do in terms of really putting artists in the map, 2 principles that guided us, is that we have to choose artists that really reflect the diversity of the Africa, but also gender-wise to reflect that diversity, and also to really complicate the notion of Africa. Like bringing Maria Magdalena Campos Pons into the picture is trying to say, Africa can no longer be that geographic entity. It's a global presence. And then later on, you will see in other projects like INCA, defined from the beginning as an Africa and an African diaspora, and so forth. So because from the beginning, we felt the African world has to be viewed as global, and it's no longer this geographic entity. So diaspora played an important dynamic, specifically when you think about who are really the Pan-African intellectuals who actually been part of this. It's really, as Paul Gilroy said, that kind of thought is not just only the idea of counter-current modernity, but when you really think about it, it can only be understood as transnational. That you think about the linkages between CLR James and Nkrumah, or Richard Wright and Nkrumah, you think about the 56th Congress. These are the same people now we celebrate. They were young men in their 20s, believe it or not, produce that kind of knowledge that becomes fundamental to defining many fields, not just in Africa, like Fanon, like Florence, like Jacques-Stéphane Alexis, like James Baldwin. All of those people have reverberations in Africa that influence people like Nkrumah, Nnamdi Azikiwe, Jomo Kenyatta. There's so many other people who met and have been, traveling companions or and so forth. So we built on that legacy. We tried to do something that put artists in the map, but we also produce a catalog that half on the artists, but half also theoretical essays to address the deficiency and the lack of literature in that. So these are the general principles, and I'm happy to talk about them more. And at this time, if you want to see an image, is the website is there. It's University in Universe, which is a great actually website, and it's an act of solidarity in itself because it really documented many of the ventures. The second one is the project of INCA, which is an initiative that I started, and I should give credit actually as a real founder, that is Okwi, the late Okwi Edwazo, and who approached me and approached other colleagues like Olu Egwiba, and then Chika Okeke, and many others who really helped a great deal in really founding this form or platform that has been very important. And as I said, two principles guided that, or three or more even, is that we have to produce quality publications. Many people think, okay, an African product can be dented and can be funky and it doesn't have to be as excellent. We said images, text, everything has to reflect. Design was very fundamental to us and we succeeded, I think. We survived. Many other journals and platforms became history because of lack of funding, but we managed. It started in Okwi's apartment in Brooklyn, and it continues through the years. And now we brought it to Cornell from the second issue, and it has been in Cornell since then. But guess what? 10 years or so, or almost 10 years, that Duke University found it as a successful endeavor and had it as part of their e-journals. From the beginning, we defined its mission as putting African artists, and like especially contemporary and modern artists, on the map with the latest cutting edge discourses. These are something that we made sure, quality images and so forth. And I think we have succeeded. If you don't have the image, this is the latest one. It's the proceedings of a conference that held in Berlin on Cosmopolitanism in Africa. So check it if you want to, or if you can go to the website of Duke University itself. So in that sense, this is the work that we thought is a work of solidarity, but it's a work that put us in the map. And then if I may just say briefly something about why the Institute of Comparative Modernities. We felt also in the discourse on modernity, other modernities are always considered second rate or derivative. And we felt that is not really, modernity is global, modernity is diverse, modernity, we in the Southern or in the South also has a claim to it, but it's different. It's based on decolonization, it's liberatory, but it produced also discourses that has been very useful. People study Fanon, study other people within discourses of the post-colonial, but they forget that these people's, their allegiance, what makes their discourses interesting because they are also global. And I will end, if you want to know more about it, there is the website, but we've done a lot of things that actually specifically focus on the idea of thinking modernity globally. Our latest, for example, we've done many conferences. The last one, the big one, was in collaboration with the Tate Modern and the Africa Institute in Sharjah, was on axis of solidarity. It was exactly about the topic that we discussed today. And it was a great, that brought focuses on certain landmark and certain events that mark what we call it solidarity in the era of decolonization. But we also focus on what solidarity means today. And solidarity in terms of Black Lives Matter was very important at that session. Talking about Palestine has been very important, and so forth. And in that sense, we felt it was also a kind of a think tank, an incubator for ideas to think about modernity globally and to think of it as diverse, as multiple, and so forth. And of course, when you think about modernity historically, one should just, in honoring Maria Magdalena Campos Pons, who's a sister that I met in the course of these kind of work to try to put our effort and contributions on the map is that there are certain events that actually produce, there's a history and legacy of solidarity that we have to bear in the arts arena and in the writing and the literature arena. For example, after Bandung, we can think about these series of Pan-African festivals, we should think about the Tricontinental. 1966 is a very important follow-up to Bandung that produced a journal that survived for a long time. Unfortunately, I had rumors that it stopped, but it was a great legacy in terms of art, the meeting of art and writing and discourses from the South. That is the journal that's called Tricontinental, in honoring that 1966, which is actually also a very global. Very few people know that it's the Moroccan thinker and activist Mahdi Ben Barka. One of the most beautiful moments when I visited Cuba and visited Oscar building is to be hit by the statue, a bust of Mahdi Ben Barka, who was actually assassinated by the Secret Service in Morocco and in France, and his body is still not found as an exile. Couldn't attend the conference, but organized it. That's a conference that brought all these leaders, Cabral, Agostino Nito, and others, were young men and giving speeches that are actually as far away from politics, focusing on art, culture, and other things. There is, of course, the Afro-Asian writers' legacy of solidarity. There is Lotus magazine in Europe, not to forget. When people talk about North and South, and I will end with this point, actually, the North is in the South and the South in the North. Leave colonialism there, but think about America is not Trump America. It is also James Baldwin America. It's Martin Luther King America. It's Malcolm X America. It is Toni Morrison's America. It's Angela Davis America. It's another thing. It's also the South there. And the same thing in England. It's Rashid Arain. It's the Black Art Movement. It is John Okonfa. It's many people. It's Eddie Chamber in art history. And many people that one could talk about. And many of us are now part of this global system. My colleagues, Chika Okeke and others, and many other people, Elizabeth Georges in Ethiopia, all of them are trying to contribute to this legacy of new understanding of cosmopolitanism, new understanding of colonialism, new understanding of modernity. And I will stop here, and I hope that I didn't take more time than what you thought I should have.
Actually, Salah, we can stay for the whole day, or not to say 2 or more on 10, listening to you and for the work you've done. It's just, unfortunately, the restrictions of this panel. But I'm very glad you point out and you brought back this kind of idea how entangled we all are, north, south, east, west, and also how you remind us, or how all your struggles and your colleagues' struggles of getting out African art, getting it out of under the umbrella of exoticism, and somehow tackling about the heterogeneity that African art had. Of course, I want to add, as you said, to the magazines, Black Phoenix, Third Texts, historical magazines that they were coming and still are coming at the same time. Third Text is still circulating and have informed many of us and many generations to come of this kind of exercises of being together with a lot of, like with an essence and with a purpose. But as, and I will go to Gabi with this, not but, together with this, as Gabi, I was reading how Gabi was saying that decolonialism or decolonial is a messy process. In one of your interviews, she was bringing the book The Reds of the Earth by Frantz Fanon, and where he diagnosed decolonization as a program of complete disorder that cannot come as a result of a friendly understanding. But of course, this, I let you speak about it, doesn't mean that we are not going to arrive to decolonial, but we need to imply all our bodies, our hands, our heads to somehow operate within this kind of period of, or this maze, or this process of, a kind of a hands-on process. So I'll let you speak about that. And I would like also to, if you can comment, we had a discussion later these days about the social movement, students' movement, and with the monuments of John Rhodes. And it's kind of interesting to tackle on this as well, since you're speaking from another perspective of the world. Usually we hear, I mean, mostly the American perspective of the world in the Black Matters, or the, you know, the most sort of Western centralized, but it's kind of interesting to hear from your side as well, from South Africa.
Thank you, Marina, and good evening, good morning, and good day to everyone, fellow panelists. And thank you, Marina and Magda, and the rest of the team who've made this possible. I think it's great to be following on Salah's footsteps. Because Salah and the generation kind of also continued the work that had been done before, for which we continue to work from. They have provided like reference points for the work that we do. And I think it's really important to acknowledge the processes that had been already in place. That are continually in place as we work. And I guess there is also a challenge for us working today, or even for a younger generation, thinking and protesting and making their voices visible today, which is why we got to talk about the student movement, which started in Cape Town in 2015, which was branded #Rhodes_Must_Fall. If you could just maybe show the other slide before this, for which the students in Cape Town started a movement to topple the statue of Cecil John Rhodes. Of course, this movement spread around the country, and it saw a very important discussion that was long overdue, being led by very young people, like a generation. So in your introduction, Marina, you mentioned that I'm an educator. So this is something that I keep in my bio, and this movement kind of started when I was working as a lecturer at the University of Wits University, which is in Johannesburg. So I was not in the country at the time that this movement erupted, but I was looking at various images that were popping up online, which the one that is here is one of them. It wasn't taken by me, and of course social media, and it became an interesting moment that was then followed by another student movement, #FeesMustFall, which started at Wits, where I teach. So the next image basically shows students at NGO, Nothing Gets Organized, a space that I co-run with Simne Tembatwalo and Dineo Pape, where then students not wanting to be on campus asked if they can use this space. So the space then kind of operates as a very open proposal that can be used by us, but whether those processes become public or not, and this was very much private in a way. So the concept of NGO also it's to allow these processes to kind of build on themselves before they become visible or hyper visible. So when I became a curator of the Berlin Biennale, for example, these movements were very important for me because I was quite inspired, especially by the moment of the removal of the statue of Cecil John Rhodes. Mainly also by the pedestal that has been left open as a space of introspection, and a space in which we can imagine other possibilities. And with us titled the Berlin Biennale, We Don't Need Another Hero, partly inspired by this movement, but also partly inspired by the idea that it is indeed very hard to argue for the smaller things and those that fill up the cracks of history, because history and its narrative is always told in grand gestures, but at the same time, those cracks can be filled by little things and that are hard, that can be hard to argue for, but not impossible. Also, there was an inspiration from the Combahee River Collective statement of 1977, in which they say they rejected pedestals and queenhood and walking 10 paces behind. To be recognized as human, levelly human, is enough. And of course, all of this built from what Salah Hassan has been talking about in terms of the histories of solidarity. And for me, in the student movement, there was like a kind of nature of I was interested on the natures of solidarities that were coming forth, where I also felt like older generations, our generation, were trying to, because they had the resources, whether writing platforms or other platforms, that there was a feeling from many people, not just me, that there was a kind of a hijacking of the student movement through acts of solidarity. So this is when I kind of started to think of also the perversity of solidarity, because there's perversity in everything, including love. And also to be able to explore this in class with students, and where we did a course which was based on natures of solidarity. Coming from South Africa, post 1994, post apartheid, post the official end of apartheid, as I would like to put it. One of the projects that I did with students was quite inspired by the Swedish solidarity movement, the anti-apartheid solidarity movement that emerged from Sweden, because it is my belief that Sweden were the kind of the most country that funded different solidarity initiatives for South Africa. So with students, we started to track one particular moment of this, which was a group of women in Sweden mostly, but also in Norway and Denmark, who would sit down and write letters to South African families who had either lost somebody or had a member of the family in exile or in prison due to political reasons. And so these women were a kind of a secret society who would write these letters as a way of distributing money by the International Defence Aid, which was located in London. And so with the students, we kind of tracked these letters, and most of them are in archives, at the Maibwe archives in South Africa, and they are protected under for 30 years, but we managed to get some of the letters that were not sent back as receipts, or the writers, who are very old at this point, had kept or photocopied for archival reasons. So this is also a kind of way to track the histories of these solidarity initiatives by sometimes also reactivating them, because after 1990, when Mandela was released from prison, it wasn't, many of these solidarity programs stopped because things were not longer black and white. And I think this in South Africa is a fact, because when we speak of Black Lives Matter, we speak also to a Black government, and we speak as a majority rather than as a minority. And sometimes we stutter with this with our language, because it becomes so complicated, which should not be the case. But but at the same time, we are saying Black Lives Matter to white supremacy, which is something that is doesn't necessarily need white people to be present for it to.
Gabi, I think we are losing you in some parts, and you're saying extremely important things. So I might come back to those. It's kind of interesting also to hear the complexification of solidarity. And also the idea of somehow the kind of hell of good intentions, the kind of idea of, help or solidarity towards somewhere, towards the troubles of others, and somehow the will to live when things are no more black and white. Actually, I think what you were saying when we lost you a little bit in the last part about the Black Lives Matters, seeing from a different perspective of black to black government, patriarchies, and white supremacy, is also a very interesting point to keep, because that's what actually we are also talking here. Not only necessarily about solidarity movements or solidarities that emerge or emerged from movements, but also a kind of a future idea of a solidarity where the different perspectives looking at this world can coexist simultaneously. And with this, I'm gonna go to Nikos, that stoically is waiting on the line, and we are waiting also to hear him. And it's kind of an interesting pass, I think, because we are talking about the precarious Souths. We've been hearing about accounts of realities in different parts of the world and different perspectives. And Nikos has been somehow commenting quite a bit on the idea of cosmopolitanism and its entanglements, and also its problems. But also he's been proposing quite repeatedly on the recomprehension of the South as a polysemic symbol that stands for direction and movement and attitude, and not necessarily as a geographical spot on the world, as a parable upon which we can build our endless quests for imaginary territories. And I would like to ask my questions to you, of course, on commenting on the Souths, but also how is the notion of a common post-colonial heritage, if this could be somehow related to the South, upheld in times of thriving neocolonialism, triggered not only by the global economy, but also by the new or newish, because now they're getting old, ultra-right-wing nationalists and authoritative governments that have gained popularity around the world. Can we recomprehend South as a set of idiosyncrasies to be rediscovered and to somehow stop this kind of popularity of other forces, evil forces? Nikos.
Thank you very much, Marina. It's a real honor to be in your company and with such esteemed fellow panelists, and also my deep appreciation to Magda. It's a pleasure to see her again after so many years. It's now customary in Australia to begin by making acknowledgement to country, to say that I'm speaking to you from Melbourne, but which is on unceded Indigenous territory. We are on Kulin Nation here in Melbourne, and I'd like to pay my respects to the Indigenous elders past and present, and to acknowledge that this is land that was never formally ceded, that they retain sovereignty of this country. Now that little symbolic acknowledgement, I think, is relevant for today's, particularly relevant. It's always necessary, but it's particularly relevant for today's discussion about rethinking colonialism, rethinking the legacies and the ways they've become implicated in the new neoliberal political economies that are dominating the world. You're right, Marina, we are facing profound challenges in terms of the political shifts. We've seen a wonderful decision in the law courts of Athens where Golden Dawn were finally found to be guilty of criminal charges, and that is a powerful statement against fascism in Europe. However, all around the world we see a deficit in democracy. We don't see the gains that and the promises flourishing in the way we hoped 50, 70 years ago, if we follow the genealogy that Salah beautifully presented to us. That genealogy was full of optimism and internationalism and collaboration. And in some ways we have seen that in the art world, but less and less in the geopolitical world. There's been more fragmentation, more division, more polarization. And that is a condition that we must face and be ready to confront. So we see this contradiction. On the one hand, in the cultural sphere, in the art worlds, not singular, plural, we see an increasing acceleration of dialogue and an increasing diversification of participants and a multiplication of perspectives. And that, of course, is incredibly wonderful. But in the socioeconomic and geopolitical, we also see a radical consolidation of power and forceful merging of collisions and polarizations. And to go back to Gabby's point about Black Lives Matters and the Rhodes sculpture, I think that's a very powerful example and one that is speaking to the sort of contradictions that we are facing today. I was in Oxford shortly after that movement started when the Rhodes sculpture was challenged. And I went down the street to look at the sculpture itself, and I was absolutely shocked. It's banal, because in Oxford and Cambridge, these things are often ignored because they're so common. But when I looked at Cecil Rhodes' sculpture, I noticed that there was 3 rows of sculptures on that building. The bottom row was in fact full of great philosophers like our friend Socrates and Aristotle, Marina. The second row was famous priests and rulers. And above the 3 rows, at the apex of this pyramid, the top of the pyramid, there was Mr. Cecil Rhodes. And I thought to myself, who the hell does he think he was? Zeus? Does he think he really conquered and controlled the whole universe? And perhaps that is the problem. This idea that coloniality created this mindset that it was completely master of the universe, that it was master of knowledge, master of power, master of the arts, master of technology. And that mastering concept produced this idea that all power emanated from one source. And I think that this has been one of the great challenges that we've had to face. And I think Salah's and Gabby's accounts have already demonstrated the way in which this idea that knowledge and power was concentrated in one particular point has been the great challenge of all of us. And the beautiful thing about our conversation today is about the way in which little ideas in one place cascade and flow on into other places. Here in Australia, Indigenous movements and political activists, and lots of different groups that come together around this issue and challenged also our own public sculptures and to rethink our own colonial legacy. And Cook, who discovered Australia, ignoring the 60,000 years or more of Indigenous culture, who'd already discovered and invented this country and this continent. So there's profound challenges to rethink this. And in terms of this discourse of the South, how that can intervene in this is to, first of all, begin by acknowledging that we aren't simply trying to redefine the center and reoccupy that center for ourselves, but rather to open up the space of dialogue. So universalism often assumed that the center, that there was one source from which all knowledge came from, and it just happened to be Europe. No, the point isn't that there is one source. The point is that there is one horizon, one field to which we all aim to. So universalism isn't the definition of the source from which knowledge, information, culture, power is controlled, but universalism perhaps in the context of this cosmopolitan, in this diasporic, in this post-colonial era, needs to be understood as a field, a horizon towards which we work towards, not something from which we derive our knowledge and information. And it's not singular in that sense, it's multiple. And therefore, I think the key point to understand is that we're not trying to integrate everything into a singular moment, but we're trying to open up things to a point of dialogue. And that, I think, is the crucial feature for our discussion today, is the possibility of seeing dialogue as the basis of differentiation and the possibility for integration. So it's not so much that we're acknowledging our ancestors and building up the scaffolding of our genealogies so that we know how to follow the footsteps of our predecessors, but rather that we define and discern points that enable us to come together and open ourselves to difference, to be curious, to encounter other things. So I think this is the crucial point about cosmopolitanism as opposed to globalization. Globalization tries to integrate and control and dominate the world, to standardize it, to impose singular sets of perspectives and standards. Cosmopolitanism, by contrast, is not trying to construct a flat world. It's trying to open up the spheres. It tries to see the cosmos and the earth together in a dialogue that opens itself to difference. And that, I think, is an important destination to head for and an important perspective to work with.
Thank you, Nikos, very much. And actually, it's a wonderful way to somehow bring it into this. We have 5 more minutes, so I will just point out some of what you were talking and answering to some ephemerality, and then we'll ask my fellow panelists if there are anything they want to comment to. It's kind of interesting to hear about the Golden Dawn, which also we spoke about the previous episode, as we are a weekly society, weekly meeting society. And it's very interesting also to see in Greece what is happening right now, because the Golden Dawn was defeated. First time after the Nuremberg trial, a party is defeated as a fascist party, as a criminal organization. But and this happened because all the different constituencies and movements gathered together and united under the same cause without solving their differences. But they had a common cause to follow that was bad for all. But what is happening right now in Greece, in the televisions and everything, is almost like a small civil war, because the right and the left are still trying to consume the victory, which is, I don't think this will bring back the Golden Dawn, but it's kind of very sad to see our inability to all together celebrate a kind of a victory that came out of our kingship, out of our togetherness. It's also interesting to hear the differences of cosmopolitanism, universalism, and sad to hear that Zeus might have wanted to conquer the world, because that's also an assumption from the Enlightenment. As Salah was saying previously, the way modernism was read and the struggles that were made so modernism is not read like that. Maybe Zeus was in very close contact with with Africa continent, with Egypt, and the same for Jesus and everyone. And maybe the Enlightenment sort of process came and decided to pure and whitewash the Greek antiquity and to serve the Western initiation of democracy and all this, when they were, as Black Athena, Beryl Mardra, and other people say that there were really obvious traces of Parthenon, and it's proven, it's not like a fantasy, being full of colors and networks that pre-existed much before the West decided to talk about globalism. So I think a question would be also, how do decolonize terms, solidarity, globalism? I mean, this all happened when somebody, a monoculture idea came and decided that there were not pre-existing networks that they didn't make part of. And I think this is something that we have to claim back in many ways, not allowing anymore this kind of propagation of a monoculture going on and on and on. I don't know, Gabi or Salah, if you want to comment on what is being said here before we go to Alison. Salah, I think, has something to comment on.
I really don't have, and I thank my colleague Gabi and Nikos that they really complemented, and I think all the presentation went together very well. I don't think that I would like to leave the platform for Alison, perhaps, to say more than what she was in terms of time assigned.
Thank you very much. So Alison, up to you, my dear, and we are looking forward to hear you.
Thank you. And thank you, Nikos, Gabi, and Salah. It's an absolute dream to be in dialogue with the three of you today and responding to your incredible thoughts and work and scholarship. And thank you, Marina, for leading us in this discussion, and for Magda for initiating this whole conversation. Thank you to the teams behind the scenes for making this happen. Where do I start? As I think about my response today, I really want to position myself and the work that I do within what Salah called, quote, the afterlife of colonialism's highly racialized systems. So to think about how we build upon those systems, I wanted to position Crystal Bridges, which is the museum that I'm Associate Curator of Contemporary Art at. So Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art is located in the northwest corner of Arkansas on land of the Osage, Caddo, and Quapaw. Due to the success of the Haitian independence movement, which resulted in France's inability to afford the large swath of colonial territory referred to as Louisiana, this land became part of the United States through the Louisiana Purchase of 1803. Now, the narrative of the incorporation of this land into the United States is often couched in rhetoric that perpetuates American ideologies, such as manifest destiny and the American dream. In essence, that it's our right to this land. And it's been articulated through legislation like the Homestead Act. So to provide context of how massive this land is, the Louisiana Purchase included the entirety of the current states of Missouri, Arkansas, Iowa, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, and Oklahoma. In addition, the area included most of the land in the current state of Louisiana, Kansas, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, and Minnesota. What is often missing from this narrative is that the Louisiana Purchase was predicated on a small but fiercely successful independence movement in the Caribbean that shifted the fate of the entire Western Hemisphere. Now, what is at stake here is the center, as Nikos said so eloquently, defining a center. Or rather, in this particular narrative, the centralization of the Western American colonial narrative that serves not only to position the United States as America, but the land, as I mentioned, acquired through the Louisiana Purchase as our right. Next slide, please. It is through the decentralization of this narrative that works like Americana, you can see here, by Miami-based Cuban-American artist George Sanchez Calderon, can be in dialogue with Crystal Bridge's 120-acre campus and collection of outdoor sculpture and architecture. This sculpture was included in State of the Art 2020, which is a quinquennial exhibition that aims to take the temperature and see what is happening in contemporary art in the United States. So for me, the sculpture really asks, what does it mean to be an American in this age of borders, sanctions, and proposals for walls that typify nationalistic agendas? For many, including Sanchez Calderon, America expands beyond the confines of the United States and is relative to the European colonization of North, Central, and South America. Or, as Gabby mentioned, history being told in a grand narrative. In his multidisciplinary practice, Sanchez Calderon often relies on various combinations of history, religion, and tradition. Next slide, please. The Americana sculpture was first exhibited in Miami Beach in 2013 at the former site of Morris Lapidus' landmark Americana Hotel, a vestige of the mid-century Miami modernist architectural style. This second iteration of his mirror-polished stainless steel sculpture is installed in close proximity to another mid-20th century architectural gem, Buckminster Fuller's Fly's Eye Dome. You can see it appearing beyond the Americana sculpture. This 50-foot version of Fuller's Fly's Eye Dome was created as a prototype for the design of a 3-story middle-class American dwelling. The trompe-l'oeil effect of the mirrored surface obfuscating the legibility of the word Americana is perhaps the sculpture's strongest statement. The word Americana represents a broad category of material culture, iconography, and aforementioned ideologies that are inherently American. The reflective surface of the cut metal letters reflects not only the viewer, but the endless landscape beyond, urgently reminding us that Pan-American culture is a culture without borders. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alison. This is wonderful to hear about Pan-American culture and about any culture at large. And I think one of our last resources is to try to get together more for more art, more democracy, more justice. So thank you very much. And to this we have to start closing our panel. And before do this, I would actually close our panels and receive the questions. And so while I'm searching for the questions, I would like to ask to have in the screen a slide I submitted earlier to the technical team, a quote by Chinua Achebe, a very sort of known historical classic book that most of the people in the States and Africa have read in their childhood. Things fall apart, as things fall apart at this time. And the reason why I'm bringing such a quote here is just to mention that from one part, the book is not largely enough quoted or known in Europe among our kinship, as Fokidis, for example, and also to remind us to somehow find moments and get together more often. So I'll leave you a few minutes here, and I will try to find the questions from our group, which I'm not receiving yet. So please, if you can, somebody send me the questions. All right. if we go back, we have some questions actually which are coming from the students of Magda Campos Pons, because you should all know that this is also a public talk, but also it's a seminar where students are participating by being with us every week, but they're also the hosts, and we are somehow getting in their class. And I will ask one question to each of you, starting with Gabby. And so one of the students, Dina asks, how do you think as a curator you can intervene or subvert the institutions of the mainstream art world? Of course, it's a difficult question to answer in a brief time, but I would like to hear.
I mean, it is a big question, and I hope you can hear me. It is a big question, and one that, of course, does not have one answer, because there's, well, I mean, first of all, I think it will be difficult for me to spend my time thinking about this question, because it would distract me from the things that I want to do where I am. And often our work is often framed as one that should disrupt certain institutions. And it was the case in Berlin, where we were kind of expected to fix some kind of mess, and I think I always quote Toni Morrison, who said that racism, because these things are part of a racist structure, exists to distract us, and so when I do my work, I kind of have certain people that I am addressing with my work, and there's also a way to address, of course, everybody with your work, but there's certain people who feel that they are always addressed, or should be always addressed when we do our work. But what happens if you rethink, you know, or maybe even try to ignore those voices? I'm more interested in that space of imagination. What happens if, yeah, there's no hero in the pedestal. There's no kind of addressee. What do we do? What can we produce, and what can we do other than disrupt and intervene? And that, I guess, interests me more. Of course, I have certain strategies, because these disruptions are sometimes very necessary, but I think more of a language or a grammar, or always kind of intervening within the grammar of these small disruptions that we undertake, and how we intervene into the grammar, because we tend to say the same things for hundreds of years until people stop understanding what we say. So I'm more interested in the disruptions that are there in language or ways of doing things.
Thank you very much, Gabby. Yeah, syntax matter in that, in what you are saying. And also, I think, as we were saying before, this kind of cracks between the here's and there's, where somehow flaws can be found and reconsidered. But also repetition sometimes might work as mantras are needed to get something in your head and make you move that direction. And then we have another question by Samuel, another student, to Salah Hassan, and that he says, thinking in reference to South as a mindscape, how does South Sudan relate to or offer from differ from other Souths in the universe?
Well, that's an interesting question, because it had to do, first it had to do with the specific history of South Sudan itself in the context of a new creation that has existed in a way, because it has a distinct culture. It has a distinct type of people in relation to the larger Sudan. Sudan, like any other country, is, it's an arbitrary carving out of a space. I mean, yes, there is a history of centralized nations along the Nile that extend from the early pre-colonial, or whatever you call it, the ancient Egyptian or ancient Nile civilizations, where Egypt today would have conquered Sudan. Sudan would have occupied part of Egypt. You have to remember, we cannot think about history. I mean, there's something that I warn, is that we're not talking about a history as a whole here, who was there first and so forth. I mean, I want to clear that out. But Sudan gained its independence, and actually Sudan is not one. Besides the diversity and so forth, there is also, Sudan has modern institutions of civil society, is one of the strongest probably in the Arab world and in Africa. I mean, it can be matched with South Africa because of its history of trade unionism, of a highly advanced, progressive Marxist movement that actually had a history and legacy that impacted the civil society. And that is translated in the latest revolution in Sudan, that it was a revolution that surprised so many people, but not if you are from Sudan itself, because you know that they are building on a legacy of multiple revolutions that happened in October 64, 1985 uprising, and so forth. All of them were mass movements that are actually non-violent. And in fact, it poses a challenge to political movements that are actually have been adopted the armed struggle, like in the southern part, which is the Sudan People Liberation Army. Prior to that, there was in South Sudan, the Anyanya Movement 1 and Anyanya Movement 2. But the argument to me, as a Sudanese who was born in the southern part, I'm from the north originally, if you want to classify me, but I've always felt like any other nation, there is an opportunity for a united Sudan than a fragmented Sudan. All Pan-Africanists will argue that way. What happened in the aftermath of the partition, which is, I call it partition because it was really imposed. It was like the 1984 partition of Pakistan and India. It was colonial. It was imposed by the U.S. and by many Western countries. And then they came to regret it, because suddenly what happened? Civil war erupted in the southern part of Sudan that actually killed many, many civilians. Not to say that the civil war that started from 1953 until, with short intervals didn't kill that many people by disease, by factor war, and so forth. So for me, if you ask me personally what South Sudan means, I wish the movement there was not frustrated by the ruling military group during the military government of al-Bashir that advocated certain ideology of Islamization, Arabization, that continued some of the problems of the ruling bourgeoisie in Sudan since independence, where they never really saw the value of diversity. And they really know the potential of a civil society. And so what happened in southern Sudan today is problematic because of the issues with civil society that has been militarized for a long time, ethnically divided, and it didn't, even the liberation movement there, the SPLA, didn't build like a really civilian side to it, or a civil society that could have actually pushed more for what its leader, John Garang, who was actually a unionist, was never pro-separate, but unfortunately he was killed or died in that famous accident. That actually ended that era of him advocating for a united Sudan and a new Sudan, because the concept of new Sudan is a concept that actually celebrates diversity in unity and unity in diversity, that call for equal share of power and wealth and redistribution of wealth, of going into the advocating for the peripheries, because the relationship between the center and the periphery has always been the problem. The center has been ruled by an Arabized elites from the Nile Valley that have always advocated certain ideologies that led to the marginalization of others. But not to say that the North has been that great, it's also underdeveloped. People who visited Sudan, there are stories about Southern Sudanese who fought during al-Bashir and have been in incursions from Eastern Sudan. They discovered that the Bijan area is as much poor as the South itself. So a program that was actually advocating for a new Sudan based on this kind of sense of equalities and so on, and actually celebration of diversity rather than thinking of it as something that is divisive. That would have been a better solution. If you ask me, the latest revolution in Sudan gives me hope, and it will have wider repercussions. And now, ironically, even though I don't agree with the process as a whole of this peace agreement that was just signed in Juba, the irony is that that peace agreement is between northern factions geographically, was actually signed in the southern part of Sudan. That gives me hope that that there is a future for unity, and that the natural flow and the natural progress will be a united Sudan. So the South in this is a state of mind that is not necessarily address the issue of marginalization across Sudan, which would have been a much more cause for united Sudan.
Thank you very much, Salah. It's great to hear you and hear this kind of perspective that we don't hear very often. And now we'll go to Nikos, because hearing you, I keep thinking about urgencies and about how we urgently united our different urgencies in somehow common paths of collectivity or collectivities, because there is something in our getting together as a kinship in that it's good, even if we can see the moon from our own room quite clearly. So Nikos, I would like to go back once more and have your kind of ending remark on this kind of problematization with and critique to cosmopolitanism and universalism, vice versus something else that might come up that somehow will meet this kind of combined urgencies. Nikos.
Thank you, Marina. On this point of urgencies, it's also very useful to pick up Gabi's point about intervention and the grammar of intervention. Because what I hear in Gabi, and maybe she can elaborate it even more, is that it's one thing to intervene with the purpose of breaking something up, or intervene with the purpose of inserting something that was previously excluded. But it's another thing to intervene with the purpose of also wanting to reconfigure the grammar of connection, consolidation, elaboration, and expression and communication. And I think this is the challenge, which is the development of a communication process that opens up dialogue rather than just simply adds another component into the machine that eventually gets co-opted. And this goes back to your point about also, Marina, the point about who's claiming the victory of Golden Dawn now. Why does everyone want to use one of your favorite phrases, want to hijack this victory for their own political agenda? And I think, and also your correction about Zeus. Zeus and Greek culture is often seen, and Greek philosophy in particular, and is seen as the source of Western civilization, of the birthplace of Europe. In fact, that's the most basic, fundamental historical error. As you rightly point out, Greece is at the crossroads with the South and the East, not the West. It was Greece and its relationship with Persia and India and Egypt and Syria that made the fertility and conducted the kind of civilizational process that happened in Greece. And to go back to the point about cosmopolitanism, of course, the phrase was first used by Socrates, who was, of course, a gadfly to the elite of Athens. It was then developed by Diogenes, who came from Sinope the Black Sea, who himself was influenced by Indian philosophy. Hence he's walking around naked like a yogi in Athens. And subsequently developed by Syrians like Zeno of Citium, who come to Athens and form the Stoic school. So the idea of cosmopolitanism was always born from people who were outsiders to the place they were in many cases, in almost all cases of the Stoic, foreigners to the city. And this critical perspective, this double-sided view of insider, outsider, challenging the certitudes, but wanting to create some new connections, is, I think, one of the urgencies that we face today.
Thank you, Nikos. So outside and inside at the same time, hijacking systems and platforms or not, while being together, looking at the moon more often all together might be the new urgencies, or the always existing and the perpetual urgencies. And somehow reconfiguring and refining these older networks that pre-existed before the West decided on a monocultural West-North or whatever monocultural world. With no further ado, I will pass to Maria, to Magda Campos Pons, which will close this episode.
Can I just say something brief that is actually, sorry Magda, I just want to say something very brief, is that when we talk about mainstream institutions, I agree of course with what has been said by Gabi, is that it's a strategy of disruption that are part of one strategy of intervention, but I also wanted to add that these institutions are actually changing under pressure. If you see, like, for example, things are changing. Allison is a good example at an institution that is started to open up. And if you think about all the ones like the MoMA and others, Met just hired a Black curator. The Guggenheim just did. Of course, it's as a result of, yes, the latest development, but there's also a long history of struggle that made these institutions actually change as a result of pressure, but it's also realizing the benefit of opening up. And of course, there is also one thing about really exhibiting or doing project with this. In addition to disruption and so forth, or presenting or correcting the narrative or inserting new figures, and that, you know, how that will change the course of art history, is that sometimes the artwork itself, once it's there, of course, we know the power structure, we know how these institutions supposedly as centers of legitimization, like many platforms, Venice, Documenta, and others, but there is a change that is happening, but it's not out of the blue. It's as a result that has been taking place, of a struggle that has been taking place over time, but also the work itself, wherever it's exhibited, like despite the context and everything, it will have a life of its own. Somehow in any institution, when it's presented, the artwork will take a life of its own and it will have its own impact. Of course, the context matter, of course, the curatorial concept, but artwork itself does, matter. That is when people suddenly discover artists that they didn't know about. When MoMA just suddenly decided to address, in the early days of Trump and the Muslim ban, digging out of its own basement artwork by others, and suddenly the whole work is talking Salahi and many other Iranians and other artists from, so-called the Muslim world. So there are multiple strategies of working there.
No,
and these institutions, we have to remember, they are changing. They are changing under pressure.
It's great to hear you all agree, and of course there are degrees of intervention or no, and degrees of contexts. I mean, I wouldn't comment on Guggenheim because maybe the hiring of a Black curator preceded by an event of maybe not exactly professional balance within the institution, but it's true, by somehow intervene in the grammar of structures, no matter what the institution somehow represents, as long as they are part of a larger idea of democracy, of course, there are ways and there are that things will be changed as you are describing. Of course, we have to follow some parts of like justice, like some initial notions of in context of democracy and justice. I don't know, Gabi, if you wanted to add something on this before we go again to Magda. Magda, come in our room, please. Come back.
Thank you. Gabi, please.
No, it's okay.
I mean, I don't have much to say, but I think I would like to part with an image that I didn't necessarily share, but it also came out of the Roads Must Fall, because it was interesting to me, because it was addressing history. So this idea of addressing history in the present was much was very interesting, because it was addressing us and the previous generations as well, where the students wrote a small note as a placard to history, and they said, "Dear history, remember this revolution has trans people, women, and differently abled people." And I think if we always remember that they are queer people, they are all sorts of energies that come into these spaces, then we don't have to remind history again and again.
Thank you, Gabi. Marina, you want to say something there?
No, I want to say thank you very much to the panelists and pass the microphone to you.
So I want to say thank you, Marina, and thank you, Nikos, Gabi, Alison, Salah, and Summer. We could still go in for another hour in this conversation. There are many topics that you all brought into the table that have been fundamental in us to come here together. I see this gathering, which is so important in the quote that Marina brought from Chinua Achebe, among heroes, I believe, of all of us. A gathering too is a gathering of good people. And to listen to you all speaking, it warmed my heart, knowing that we have a common line. And I believe that line, to go back to Nikos, is a horizontal one. And it's a one that is in the horizon, in his feminine horizontality that allow for intersections, that allow for intersectionalities, that allow for different points to go up, go down, and combat with new possibilities. I keep myself a dreamer. I keep myself a romantic. I keep myself trusting that besides that in solidarity are complexities, are perversity, are is pain, that is the path that we need to go forward for the scene that we all believe it together and the scene that we aim together. We are doing with these panels and with this webinar, inserting new problems. We are disrupting a structure of the past, and we are constructing new horizon lines. I am proud of the work that we're doing collectively. I am grateful for you all for trusting this path, and I am immensely in gratitude for your presence, for your words, for your knowledge, and for your heart. I love you all. Thank you. I want to remember everybody, our audience, that Wednesday, we are coming back with our next episode and our next topic, performativity of the body. And Marina will be introducing those topics next Wednesdays. Please come back to us, stay with us. Our conversation is of urgency. Thank you.
And one more thing, don't run away from your computer right away. There is, with the closing slide and all the notes that you can take for registering next episode, there is a music we commissioned by Peruvian-Japanese composer, Paochi Sasaki, that she wrote for this. It's a 5-minute piece, and it's the right ending to just take this 5 minutes, not doing anything, and reflect to what has been discussed here by our wonderful guests. Good night.